Back to you now at 9/11. Today on KOCO5, we're putting the political spotlight on the issues with the most impact on us as a country and as the state of Oklahoma. Not short on topics either. We're about to cover everything from the North Korea summit to the vote on medical marijuana in our state. Joining us this morning from D.C., we have Senator James Lankford.
Well, glad to be with you back from D.C. It's nice to be able to be home. Got in late last night and good to be home.
Well, I'm glad you had safe travels, and thank you so much for your time,
Sure.
as usual. Get straight to it. I want to start with the North Korea summit. Long time coming between President Trump, Kim Jong-un. From an outsider's perspective, it seemed like one big photo op.
It was.
Very short, pats on the back, handshakes, that Hollywood-produced film. And then all of a sudden, this guarantee from the president that North Korea is no longer a political threat, which I'll get to in a second. But first, what was your overall takeaway from that meeting?
Overall, very positive. And what's
Okay.
interesting is for about the last 6 presidents, they've tried to be able to engage with North Korea. And the typical way to do diplomacy is you line up all of your lower level staff in the State Department and their Foreign Affairs Office. You try to work out papers and agreements. Then you work up the food chain, basically, to higher and higher level. Eventually get to the leadership of the 2 countries and they sign some document. That's not worked for 5 or 6
Sure.
presidents in a row. So President Trump said, let's turn the whole thing on its head. Let's meet with the leadership first of the 2 countries, see if we can establish some basic parameters, and then start working through the details after that. We'll see if that works. It is a good attempt. I'm not opposed to the attempt. What came out was an agreement to say of denuclearization from North Korea. Now we got to get definitions to that, and they have to be able to prove it. We can't just trust their word.
And I want to get to that next. Let's pop up this tweet. I know you have seen this. This is a partial tweet from President Trump saying this. No, this is not it. He says, a very positive experience. There's no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. Meeting with Kim Jong-un was an interesting and positive experience. North Korea has great potential for the future. Should we believe the president? I mean, surely he can't think that quick meeting was
surely he can't.
End all be all to their nuclear program.
He's exceptionally optimistic on a lot of the issues that he goes through anyway. He throws out what's the best. We've seen him do this several times where he'll throw out, this is what everybody agreed to, this is what we're going to do. And if they don't do it, he pushes back very, very quickly. So I'd expect him to do the same thing with North Korea. They said they were going to denuclearize. We expect them to do it. But if they don't, sanctions are still in place. Our diplomacy is still in place. We're still trying to cut off their energy work outside the country to be able to cut off money coming into the country. All those things are still in place.
Do we know that irreversible denuclearization is on the table?
That's what our focus is. The president's been clear about it. Secretary of State's been very clear about that. Not just saying we're going to stop doing it, but actually concreting over all their facilities, making sure they're actually closed.
And if we do continue with that, what system or systems do we have in place to make sure that North Korea holds their end of the bargain there?
The key way to do that, in fact, the only way to do that, is to be on the ground looking at those facilities. We can see them from satellites, we can know from activity, but you've got to actually have somebody on the ground going into the facility, doing testing, checking for radiation, looking for how they're evaluating.
I think the other thing a lot of people thought about, and you can't ignore, is that this was a meeting with one of the world's most ruthless dictators. His people live in squalor and fear. He's ordered the death of his own uncle and his children. Did you think it was inappropriate that he used terms and phrases like, he's a pretty smart cookie, or we understand one another, he's a pretty tough guy, the list kind of goes on and on? Did you find that inappropriate from our president?
It is a little odd to be able to come out and be able to praise somebody that we know is a ruthless dictator. He comes across as this jolly fellow that's always happy. Everyone around him is always happy, but quite frankly, everyone's around him is always happy because he'll execute them if they're not always happy and smiling around him. So that is a big issue. Quite frankly, I don't think the president forgot that. He brought up warm beer and the whole situation from an American that had been murdered basically in North Korea and had returned home in the final days and then died quickly when he got here. So the president hasn't forgotten that. Secretary of State hasn't forgotten that. But president, again, his own communication style, he goes in wishing for the best, pushing for the best. If that doesn't happen, then he pulls back pretty quickly.
Okay, a lot to follow there for sure. I want to get to some other topics this morning. Big breaking news came down yesterday. The Inspector General's report coming out about former FBI Director James Comey saying that his timing for the Hillary Clinton email investigation was extraordinary and insubordinate. So twofold question for you here, sir. Sure. Do you think that Comey acted, there was political motivation there? And would we have seen a Trump presidency without James Comey?
Well, let me take the second one first. We'll never know. I mean, we really don't. If you're Hillary Clinton.
Do you think so?
You know, I really can't tell. There was a lot of momentum that was moving. That was a noisy thing at the very end of the campaign, but it's really hard to be able to guess that one way or the other. So I hate to even second guess that. And I don't mean that in a political way. There's just really no way to know because there's so many variables that are out there. The Inspector General's report's a lot more harsh than a lot of the national media has put out. Y'all have been very good about the reporting that I've seen from y'all, trying to detail this out. But there are a lot of folks that are saying, well, he said that Comey was insubordinate, but there's no evidence of any bias. Well, the Inspector General said, I have no evidence of someone saying we're doing this because of our bias. But then he details out 500 pages of bias, including things like James Comey wrote the memo exonerating Hillary Clinton in May, but didn't even interview her until July. So he wrote it months in advance.
So you think yes?
Oh, there are lots of issues. The key questioner at the table that the FBI put questioning Hillary Clinton during the interview was actually a Clinton supporter. Peter Strzok, who was the point person, was a Clinton supporter. When the emails came out from New York that had the 340 emails, the Washington, D.C. office leadership sat on them for a month. And eventually some folks in the New York office leaked it out to be able to press the D.C. office to even act on the evidence that they knew that they had. There were the key folks that are in the Southern office that were actually trying to get a job for with Hillary Clinton for their son at the same time they're leading the investigation on the Clinton investigation. There was all kinds of mess throughout it that the Inspector General detailed out, including numerous leaks to the media that happened, including the lead people actually contacting the Clinton lead folks, Podesta, to say, here's what's about to come. We want to let you know before it actually comes out. So lots of problems and issues that have to be cleaned up in the D.C. office of the FBI, not local offices.
Okay, did want to get your take on that. We have a couple different segments here. Last, in this segment, pivoting over to Trump's zero tolerance policy. I know you've been vocal on this too. At the border, some 500 children have been separated from their parents and families in an attempt to crack down on illegal immigration. Got this tweet from a viewer. Can we pop up this tweet? This is from SRS. And this person said, does Senator Lankford support the administration's policy of separating those immigrant children from their parents?
I do not. Say you? My preference is parents and kids stay together as much as we possibly can. The difficulty is when you have an individual, whether it is an American citizen or someone who's not in the country legally, that has committed a felony, it gets much tougher. Because if you have an American citizen that's committed a felony and they have a child with them at that time, they get separated as well. Now, if just crossing the border the first time is a misdemeanor, but multiple crossings or what's unknown, that's the harder part. So that's been difficult, but that's been policy for a long time.
And so why is this happening? I know Sarah Huckabee Sanders yesterday in that press conference quoted the Bible as saying, it's biblical to follow what the government says. But what about the root of Christianity that says, love and accept everybody for who they are and where they come from? So why is this even happening in the first place? And how can they use that as an argument?
I was a little surprised to see the biblical argument come out on that as well. Clearly, God's design is for a family unit, and that is the basis of our culture and of our society is the family unit. And I think you leave families together as much as you can possibly leave families together until you have to separate. There is a court ruling that's out there that's been under great dispute for a while, that if an adult is in the process of going through legal action, you have to use the least restrictive possible location to be able to put the child, and that's typically with a family member or with some other relative. And so that separation happens pretty quickly because of that court ruling. But there's a lot of complications. I've had some folks that have asked me about the cages people are being kept in the southern area.
Tents and how hot it is.
And not getting access. I would tell you, a lot of folks have forgotten that when there was the surge of all the unaccompanied minors in 2013 and 14, President Obama kept about 1,000 children in Fort Sill in Lawton. At that time, Jim Bridenstine, who was at that time the congressman from Tulsa, tried to get in that facility, and the Obama administration blocked him from getting that facility. The same thing that's happening now to other folks trying to get into some of the facilities of the Trump administration. So that's not a change in policy. But I have some phone calls. In fact, I have some calls today, even with DHS, that'll be coming up talking about this. How do we make sure we keep as many families together as possible?
Okay, thank you for clarifying your stance there. That was the majority of our viewer questions today. Actually, we have one more segment with you, so if you'd hang tight, we'd really appreciate it.